Hi everyone. This lecture will be talking about our reading on juvenile lifers. This is one of our last readings for the course. So, today's lecture will be talking about total institutions, what exactly that thing is. It should be a bit of a review. We will be talking about the Lifers Club as a study from your reading. Then we'll talk about some of the members of that Lifers Club and the teenage lifers. We'll then be talking about the essay prompt for this week's essay. So, total institutions. A prison is a total institution that's referred to in your book. So, we have to talk about what that thing is. A total institution is a social setting that seeks to control all aspects of its members' lives. And they do these for a variety of purposes. So, a cult, for example, can be a total institution that seeks on the good end to enlighten the individual involved in that organization, or on the more nefarious end to take all the money of the cult member and take greater advantage of them. The military, uh, similarly, wants to control the individual to make that individual loyal primarily to the military and to make that individual useful for military purposes. Um, Keep in mind that these total institutions, it's a neutral concept, right? Dangerous cults certainly are dangerous. The military can be seen as a neutral entity in society, though. And similarly, prisons are total institutions that seek, maybe for justified reason, to keep people and control their movements in totality. So, with total institutions, we have to talk about the resocialization process involved in total institutions. And when people become involved with a total institution, they have to relearn how to behave in that given setting. To go into prison, you have to relearn, how you communicate with other people. You have to relearn possibly where you sleep, how you sleep, when you eat, how you eat, all these things. And that can be a pretty heavy process. Within our specific reading, the Lifers Club apparently is taking an added level to the resocialization process, trying to make that process more positive for its members. So let's talk about the Lifers Club specifically. This is a really good example of a micro level or qualitative study. It shows how people involved in the Lifers Club cope with being in a total institution in the long term. So most members of the Lifers Club, as it indicates, are in there for life, or at least a substantial portion of their lives. There are two concepts that are referred to in the reading that I want you to have a greater understanding of. First is the concept of the virtual life sentence. So people who are committing virtual life sentences aren't necessarily locked up for their whole lives, but they're locked up for a really central portion of their life, and because of that, not only are they spending the years in, they're missing opportunities other people would have, and they probably identify as being a criminal for all of the period of their life afterwards. So, for example, if you are in prison from the age of 15 to 50, you missed going to college, you missed having kids, you missed meeting a lifelong partner in all likelihood, right? So that is taking away many of the components that many of us consider to be valuable to our life experience. Another concept we have is the concept of the mandatory minimum sentence. This is less central to the reading, but still important to understand. Mandatory minimum sentence is a minimum set of years that must be served for a specific crime. Longer mandatory minimums, such as like 25 years, are often associated with murder. Often shorter mandatory minimum sentences might be associated with like drug dealing. But what we're talking about in this reading in particular, they refer to one person serving a mandatory minimum of 25 years. That person almost definitely, in all likelihood, killed someone. It doesn't refer. If it wasn't killing someone, it would have to be something like a really severe sex crime. Either way, that person probably did something that almost everyone would think was not right. So let's talk about this Lifers Club. All of the members of the Lifers Club were serving very long sentences for very serious crimes. Many of them probably had mandatory minimums on them. But to be a member of the Lifers Club, you had to have a deep belief that you owe a significant debt to society. So these people want to be different. They want to try to figure out how to make the world a better place, even though they're in prison, right? So figure out how to repay their debt to society. And it was discussed in the reading that most of the members of the Lifers Club are old, and most of those are like grizzled, stereotypical inmates. Your guys covered in tattoos, your guys, scarred and beaten, battered by the prison system. But the leaders of the group in particular are young, and they are leaders, which make them intriguing for the case of studying. So let's talk about those people and what it means to be a teenage lifer. It doesn't necessarily mean that you were all the teenage lifers are teenagers, right? So they committed their crime when they were teenagers. So to keep in mind with this, teenagers may be less capable of making good decisions than previously believed. This is very well backed up by the psychological research. Several studies in the 90s came out. I'm not that familiar with the psychological literature because I am a sociologist, but several studies did come out in the 90s, and probably more have come out since then, that the human brain isn't really fully mature until about the age of 22 to 24. So when teenagers make big, dangerous, terrible decisions, it might be because part of their brain isn't fully developed. For this reason and other reasons, in 2005, the Supreme Court ruled that juvenile offenders cannot be sentenced to death or to life without parole. So that was ruled to be unethical or inhumane for people to be sentenced to death. But this raises a further question: is a virtual life sentence ethical for juveniles, right? So if somebody at the age of 15 commits a crime with a mandatory minimal sentence and they get that 25 years for murdering someone, well, is taking 25 years of a 15-year-old's life, is that ethical? Especially if that person didn't have full reasoning capacities. And there are some obvious arguments you could make that say absolutely, but these are the philosophical issues we have to deal with. One of the lifers, I believe it was one of the leaders, said, aging in prison is inevitable, but growth is optional. So this posits a couple questions to us. Can you grow enough within prison to be released? If you do that optional growth, should you be released? If you make sufficient progress in the lifers program, you get out? Do young inmates have a greater capacity for growth? So it might be that those older guys don't have enough decades in them to become fully rehabilitated. But maybe if somebody kills a bunch of people when they're 15, they might be a completely different person when they're 50, and they should be let go. Similarly, to go along with that, what if that crime is truly horrible? What if a 12-year-old engages in serial killing among his classmates, right? Should that person ever be let go? These are big questions that we are going to explore in our essay prompt, actually. So, review the case, and I'm sorry, I think this may be a discussion prompt now that I look at it. I'm sorry, but either way, review the case of James Holmes in the 2012 Aurora shooting. And there is a link, again, like I said, I'm pretty sure in the discussion prompt, to a New York Times story that came out the day of the event. Read that over. Refamiliarize yourself with the situation. In all likelihood, you do remember some of the facts of the case, but just look it over. And then in the prompt, answer the questions. Do you think that he could benefit from something like a Lifers Club or a similar group? And then, after completing the program, would you ever grant Holmes parole? So let's say he was in the program for 20 years and he reformed significantly. Would you grant him parole even though he killed 12 people? And I want you, as always, to justify your answer from material from the text, link to the article that I sent you, and outside academic sources. And as always, if you have any difficulties in accessing this, please let me know.